Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this Tuesday morning. We're going to give it a couple minutes for everybody to log on and join us still. Um, if you cannot hear us, um, Amy and I were just on our audio and it was working. So if you cannot hear me right now, you may want to log off and log back on. It's probably something, a setting on your end. You can adjust your settings or log off and log on. But Amy and I were able to hear each other just fine. So you may need to check into that, but we'll give it a couple minutes here for people to keep logging on. Numbers are still jumping up a bit, so we'll give it another minute or so. For those of us that, for those of you that didn't hear already, we're just waiting a minute for everybody to finish logging on. If you cannot hear me speaking right now, that may be an issue on your end. So you may need to adjust a setting on your computer, or you can log off and log back on. But just be aware that the audio was working for Amy and myself. All right, it looks like numbers are slowing a bit, so we will go ahead and get started. So for those of you who don't know, I am Megan Kramer. I'm the Professional Development Coordinator here at ICPN. Your microphones are muted and your cameras are off, and they will remain that way throughout the entirety of this morning's session, so you don't need to worry about that. Please do use the chat box. We will be monitoring that and bringing any questions you all have to Amy throughout or at the end and maybe throughout it, depending on how things are going and what questions you guys have. And then you can also use so you can use the chat box for that, or the question box. We'll send it directly to us. Um, Please be aware that when we log off of this, there will be a Zoom survey that pops up. That is a satisfaction survey that we ask you all to complete just to help us have feedback for today's session and ideas for upcoming sessions or topics you'd like to see covered. That one will pop up automatically at the end, and then you will receive an email to your email that you registered for this webinar with, and that will have a survey that needs to be completed to receive your CEs. So the survey that comes to your email is the one that must be completed in order to receive your CEs. Please be aware that you do need to be logged on for the majority of today's webinar to be eligible for CEs, and then that survey must be completed as well. You also must be logged on from your own unique link that was sent to your email that you registered for this webinar with in order to receive your CEs as well. If you're logged on as a group sitting together and watching it, we aren't able to verify that you were on and you won't receive CEs. So please do be aware that you must be on with your own unique link. And then we also don't have people, or if you called in, that will not work either. You need to be on from that link, so you cannot dial in. So please be aware of that. If you have any questions, you can email me or put it in the chat box and I will do my best to get back to you. But otherwise, I think that's all the housekeeping that we have for this morning. So we're going to hand it on over to Amy.
All right, thanks, Megan.
Thank you.
Can you hear me okay? Okay. Um, I always open up the chat box to watch like people say good morning and stuff, and then I try to like move it out of the way. I have a difficult time getting my uh uh screen correct. Good morning, Kylie Center. Good morning, good morning, good morning, everybody. Okay, so today hi Emily from Springfield. How are you this morning? Um, Today, we are going to talk about leadership. And so I want to just take a moment and sort of find out who's in the room. So, what sort of people is it that you guys are currently leading? Who do you consider yourself a leader with? So, I'm talking about frontline supervisors, program managers, team leaders. Most people in this field are doing some sort of leadership. And so, what we're going to talk about today is not some sort of particular leadership theory. We want to talk about leadership from a theoretical perspective, but we want to talk about it in the sense that what works? Like, what works when your phone goes off at 6 a.m. in the morning? Does anybody feel that? When you're covering a shift, when you're trying to cover a shift and fill the next shift so you don't have to continue to cover it, when you're trying to coach somebody or train somebody, those are the sorts of leadership that we want to talk about. And so I want you to sort of go into this with today's mindset that you don't have to be perfect to lead well. You really just need to be intentional in what you're doing. And so Megan went over all of the housekeeping things. And so what I really want to do is encourage you guys to sort of stay present. I want you to use the chat box and sort of learn from each other as we go through this. As you can see from the comments, we have a lot of people on the phone or on the call with us this morning that are in sort of management slash leadership roles. And I think that is extremely important. And we all have a lot of knowledge and ideas that we can bring to the table about what works for us. We are going to take a break about halfway through this. And yeah, go from there. So without further ado, I want to encourage everybody to answer the question, what does leadership mean to you? And so before we get into the framework and the data and all of that, what does leadership mean to you? Not the textbook answer, right? I want your answer. And so what does that mean? Let's see what people are saying. Mentor, new hires, supporting, coaching, yep, equipping people to carry out the programs that you are writing, teaching, coaching, leading by example, collective effort. Yeah, ain't that the truth? Providing resources. So I'm always particularly drawn to Brene Brown's quote when she talks about leadership. And so I think that this is an excellent quote and it says, I define a leader as anybody who takes responsibility for finding the potential in people and processes and who has the courage to develop that potential. Um, so I think that I want to read some of these comments here. Sorry, I got stuck on one of them. Positive influence. Yes. Guiding by ethics. Somebody who makes conscious decisions to lift those up around them. Um, Hi, good morning, Casey. I just saw your name pop up. Supporting the team around you. Absolutely. Leading by example. Yes. And so notice that most of what people are saying is, in fact, behavioral, right? It's really sort of the lens that we're working from. Leadership is a skill. It's not a title. And every single skill can be practiced. And so setting clear expectation, right? Like all of these things are behavioral. And so there's things that I want us to be able to go into today's thoughts that we can change what we're doing and we can practice these and in turn we can sort of become better as a result of it, guiding others to do the right thing. Absolutely, as we ourselves do the right thing. Um, Sorry, I'm having an issue with my chat box here. Okay. So today's agenda, we are going to start with data. Because when I say frontline leadership matters, I want you to sort of see the evidence to support that. And so then we're going to take a look at two different leadership frameworks that actually complement each other. And then we're going to spend some time talking about real sort of practical tools that you can start using today. Every section that we're going to talk about sort of has a practical takeaway. And so hopefully by the end of this, you have some actual behavioral type things that you can take with you. So we're going to talk about authentic and servant leadership. We're going to talk about data. We're going to talk about what it is that our staff want from us. And then we're going to talk about a specific sort of framework that is practical, and then things that you can sort of take today, starting Monday, whatever it is. So how many people resonate with this? This is the reality of all of us, that were in the chat box saying who we lead. This is very much the reality of frontline leadership and who sort of feels this. There's system demands. And when we talk about system demands, we're talking about policies. How many people sort of took the setting rule, took us for a ride. There's compliance, there's documentation requirements. And so that sort of administrative system weight can really be relentless in terms of what we're doing. Then there's staff needs. There is burnout. How many people are working with people that are sort of feeling burned out? There is turnover. There's training gaps. And then there's the emotional sort of labor of doing direct care work. And then there's the support for the folks that we're working with, the individuals that we're sort of serving. And so each person that we're serving has a unique set of needs. They require presence, they require persistence and advocacy on our part. They require us to make really tough judgment calls and provide care to them. Yeah, the turnover is immense and it really is everywhere. You're right. And so I feel like the reality of the frontline leadership is that you're asked to be a systems manager, you're asked to be a counselor, you're asked to be a coach, a role model. Oftentimes, all of those occur in the same hour or the same day. Oftentimes, the same hour, but usually several times a day, people feel that. Like, how many people sort of feel this reality of frontline leadership in terms of what we do? And it's hard to every 5 minutes. Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's talk about the data. So when we talk about the data, we want to talk about what it is that is actually happening. Because leadership doesn't really exist in a vacuum, right? It exists in a workforce crisis that has sort of real numbers and research behind it. And so, what I want to do is really sort of encourage you to think about your workforce and the people that you're talking about every single day, because many of you are living these numbers that we're going to go through. Many of you are feeling this, all of those things at once. So when we talk about data, that first number there, 37%, that's 37% is the turnover ratio. However, that means roughly 1 in 3 of your DSPs left last year. However, that's an average. And so some agencies, some of you are feeling above 100%. That means that you have turned over your entire workforce and then some multiple times, right? Or there's that one position that you keep turning over. The estimated cost to replace just one DSP is about 4,630 plus dollars. And so even before you account for the impact on the people that we're supporting, nationally, it costs you that much to replace that in terms of resources, training, materials, physicals, and those sorts of things. Most agencies don't have that sort of bandwidth to continuously sort of do that. This is an old statistic, 9.7% vacancy rate. I would say a lot of agencies are feeling a higher vacancy rate than that. And so this really sort of, this number, what this tells us is it's not just a staffing problem. It sort of is a leadership emergency, right? Like it's something that is a gut punch. You know, go back to the slide where we talked about how many of you are feeling trying to fill vacancies while filling vacancies, right? Like that is a real number. And working at the Illinois Crisis Prevention Network, often we're walking alongside people that are looking for placement. And so it is not uncommon for us to reach out to some of you on the call that do great things and ask like, hey, you have an opening at your agency. Would you consider serving Megan? And it is not uncommon for you to say we would, but we don't have the staff to do that, or they need additional staff supports and we can't staff that. And so almost 27% of agencies turned away new clients in 2024 due to staffing shortages. That number actually seems a little bit low to me. But if you think about it in terms of that's 1 in 4 agencies had to say no to people who actually need support because they don't have staff. So think about what that means for folks that are on our waiting list. For those of you on our call this morning, I see some service coordination agencies on here, right? Like you guys feel this number. And I know that you're relentlessly sending out packets, relentlessly picking up the phone and calling people, relentlessly looking for people that are arguably should be easier to serve in the community. However, they can't. Right. Take out the one-to-one staff and issues, you know, with the maladaptive behavior. It's absolutely an emergency, a leadership emergency. So the ripple section really comes into place though when we walk through these bottom 3 columns. And so the person supported the team and then the frontline line leader, right? So when a DSP walks out the door, that ripple sort of hits 3 places. And so think about the trauma of the individuals that we're serving. So we practice and preach consistency and stability. However, every single time a DSP walks out the door, we lose that stability. We lose that routine. We lose relationships with people. And so that directly affects our safety. That directly affects the dignity and the quality of life of the people we're serving. Not intentionally. We're not intentionally doing that. However, that is sort of the ripple effect of a DSP leaving. The team. Your team has to absorb extra shifts. They have to skip coaching sessions from you. They burn out faster because, you know, there's people that they can't say no. We know they can't say no, so we ask them. And so it creates this sort of self perpetuating turnover cycle. There's been other trainings where we've done where we talk about that cycle of stress and that burnout cycle, right? Like this is exactly what we're talking about. Think about it in a wheel. And so a DSP leaves and we ask the staff that are there that are doing a great job to do more and more, and therefore their resilience becomes lower, right? And so all of these trainings that you guys attend from us sort of start to intersect and interweave. And so then it affects us and it affects all of you, your frontline leader, the people with their feet on the ground walking alongside the staff that we're supporting. And so it really sort of shifts our ability to shift from mentoring people to really firefighting. And so it allows us less time to lead and more time that we're sort of simply in survival mode. And so I think that these numbers, sort of speak volumes to what we're all sort of experiencing. Absolutely, Andrea. She made a comment that we're not just losing a staff member, but you're losing their experience and knowledge as well. And so, especially when that really good one walks out the door, oftentimes they have some pretty good instructional control with the folks that we're serving, right? And then everybody sort of feels that as we carry on. So that's sort of the stake. I mean, there's a lot at stake if we can't figure out how to do and control things that we're able of doing and controlling every day. So the idea that managers shape the daily experience of our work. And so Gallup has been tracking this for sort of decades, that 70% of the variance in whether your team is engaged, productive, and staying comes down to the immediate supervisor, not the CEO, not the HR department. It comes down to you. It comes down to you as sort of the front line leader. And so this is a very research-driven statistic. It sort of echoes itself in research after research after research that 70% of people either make it or break it because of their immediate supervisor. And so think about that. Think about the burden that that carries for us and the opportunity that it carries for us. And so we have far more influence in our team's experience than almost anybody else at the organization. And so I think at times, though, it's easy for us that are in sort of those frontline leaderships to find fault in some of our supporting departments. Well, if HR would have onboarded them different, well, if this would have changed. However, data after data shows that it really comes down to the frontline supervisor. There is a really great, Ancor does a really great survey with DSPs. And for those of you, I see a lot of familiar names on here. We have talked about that survey sort of a lot. And so 50% of DSPs have left an organization specifically because of a supervisor. I think we all feel that. It does not feel good to have that number. However, that's a very true thing. 13% turnover decrease. So an agency that invested in frontline leadership and development saw a 13% drop in turnover in a single year. And so that's not a magic number. That's actually what happens when your supervisors and your frontline supervisors have support and skills to actually lead. And so, how many of you on here also supervise people that are frontline supervisors? So, I think about like those of you that are Qs. Do you supervise team leaders or home coordinators or whatever it is that you sort of call additional layers of frontline supervisors? Yeah, a lot of people on here work with clients. Um, I am in our Chicago office today and they're doing a parking lot outside. This is going to be relevant for a second, but there's like a layer of dust coming in, so my nose is itching badly. I do not supervise staff. Yeah, most people on here sort of are familiar with that sort of structure where you are supervising, you yourself are a frontline leader. However, you're also sort of leading and managing people behind you. So I think we can sort of then see the importance of this idea that managers sort of shape what we do. So these are what people want from leaders. And so it comes down to four needs. And so people show up sort of across industries that these are consistent things that they want from leaders. However, Ancore survey really sort of put a stamp on these that what DSPs wanted from leaders sort of could fall into these sort of four buckets. And so hope. Hope means DSPs do very hard, emotionally demanding work. And so they themselves need to know that it matters. They need to know that the person that they support is better because of their preference. And so when you name the why, and we're going to talk a lot about this, you give people a reason to stay. And so hope means where are we going? And so you want to connect today's tasks to a purpose. How many of you do better when you know the why? When you understand the progress, and that when there's an understanding of a vision of what's possible. So that's the first sort of bucket, is this idea of hope. Then the next one is trust. So can they rely on you? And so this is about consistency. It's not about personality. It's not about behavior. It's about trust. And so are the rules the same for everybody? And can they count on those rules to be fair and predictable? And so there is nothing that will erode trust faster than an inconsistent leader, or a leader that has their favorites, right? And so when expectations are inconsistent, then people really feel devalued. The next bucket is sort of compassion. And so compassion doesn't necessarily mean softness in terms of like warm and fuzzy. It means attentiveness. It means seeing the person, not just their performance. And so it's asking people how they're doing and meaning it. It's knowing that they carry a lot. And so we supervise staff that are very gritty and resilient. And with that comes a lot of trauma. And so we all, I think, probably work with people and supervise people that oftentimes have experienced more before they even arrive for their shift than we may in our entire day, right? And so it's compassion. It's, do you care about me as a human being? And so the idea behind this, and we're going to go into all four of these at the end and sort of give practical takeaways, is to check in, not just check on. And so you want to listen first and really see the person behind the role and coach people with respect. The last bucket is stability. And so in high chaotic environments, leaders who stay calm and steady create predictable routines for people that really become worth their weight in gold. And so I'm going to encourage you all to think back about supervisors that you have had yourself and sort of what their buckets carried in each one of these categories. And so think about that stability bucket. And so were they able to be calm in like under pressure in an uncertain situation? And so stability really talks about reducing that chaos. Communicating things early and staying calm under pressure. There is no secret that what we do can be chaotic at times, right? Unpredictability. We work with people that are often unpredictable. Their behavior can be unpredictable. The world is unpredictable at a much higher scale. And so we want to create routines that people can count on. And so this is sort of the same message that we preach when we talk about basic behavioral principles, right? We want to create routine and predictability for the folks that we're leading, just like we do for the folks that we're serving, right? Those individuals, the individuals with the intellectual and developmental disabilities. This is the same sort of thing that we want our direct support professionals. We want them to give the individuals hope. We want them to build trust with the individuals. We want them to be compassionate human beings and care about them and provide that stability for them. So it's our job as leaders to sort of take that from a leadership perspective. And so when you think about these four buckets for yourself, which one of these four do you think is the most absent from your team right now? And if you're comfortable sharing, that's great. If not, really just think about that and think about when you lead people, which one of these sort of buckets maybe has less in it than others. Stability, right? Stability. Um, all of them. Yeah, I think that's a very honest and fair answer. Stability, I think, goes back to some of that data we talked about with the DSP openings and the turnover. It is hard to sort of not be in that cycle of chaos, right? Stability, yeah. Certainly, there's people chiming in with other ones or uh, sort of a variety of buckets, but stability seems to be the majority of the answers. But I think all is probably depending on the day, right? Yeah, I have, Brittany talked about how she has a department right now that's struggling to keep a supervisor, so their stability is consistently rocked. Trying to maintain a stable leadership with some of us stepping up, and it has been a challenge, right? Yeah, because it's hard to be stable when you get stretched thinner and thinner as a result, for sure. So, what do DSPs want and value in a leader? And this is going back to that survey that I talked about from Ancor. And so, they did do that survey every 2 years. And so in 2023 and 2025, and we'll talk about what some of that data has changed over the course of time. So it really, this Ancor survey, Realis survey, is really one of the most robust sort of annual Snapchats. It's where's my head at? It's on my Snapchat streaks. Snapshots of the DSP workforce in our country. And so that survey takes about, I don't know, between 500 and 700-ish DSPs nationwide that have the average length of employment, I think, is about 5 years. So it's a pretty decent idea of the DSP workforce in that we're all sort of dealing with. So 70%, 76% of those DSPs surveyed want recognition from their frontline supervisor. So 3 out of every 4 DSPs say that it is very or extremely important. And so they sort of rated things on a scale like somewhat important, very to extremely important. And so 3 out of 4 DSPs say that it is very or extremely important that they receive some form of recognition from their supervisors. Yet, I would say, and all of you would sort of agree, that we tend to underinvest in recognition because we don't have the bandwidth to take that on, right? It's not because we want to, it's because we just don't. So 81% say that they want a safe feedback channel. And so the vast majority, we're only leaving 19% of people behind. So the vast majority of DSPs really want a structured, safe way to tell their supervisors when something isn't working. Not necessarily a complaint hotline, right? But they want to be able to pick up the phone. They want to be able to talk things through. They want to be able to understand that why. Because the harsh reality is sometimes things are wrong and there's not a lot we can do about it. And so think about it from a quality improvement tool, not necessarily a complaint hotline. But I think a lot of times we sort of shut that down because we're sort of on negativity overload, right? We sort of are on complaint fatigue where it's like, I can't listen to one more thing possibly go wrong. And so it's really sort of about flipping the script for us and not thinking about it as a negative sort of tool. And oftentimes when we're not present on a consistent basis, then we do sort of get the extreme complaints. So 78%, so again, a pretty high number, say that they would like to stay with career advancement. And so development should not be a perk. It should be a retention strategies. And so DSPs who really see a future tend to stay longer. And so I encourage you all to sort of talk in the chat about things that you do to retain your DSPs. And so I know a lot of organizations do tuition reimbursement or do some continuing education for their DSPs, those sorts of things. So, so supervisor traits. So let's walk through this table at the bottom here. So notice that in the first one, that respect for staff as individuals, that jumped 12 points from 2023 to 2025. So that's really not a coincidence, folks. That is a response to how the workforce was treated during and after COVID. And so respect is really now just a baseline expectation for the folks that we're employing. It is not a bonus. It is a baseline expectation. And that number will probably continue to grow. And I think that we have all worked with people as leaders that don't respect the staff as sort of individuals. We sort of get in this mindset where we have the mindset that they're just going to turn over, so we need not invest in them. And then that becomes a vicious cycle. So mentorship rising, that went from 15% to 39%. And so DSPs don't just want a boss. They want somebody who will invest in them. They want somebody who will believe in them. And so that really is a shift in our workforce. It's a shift in what people are asking for. And so they're asking that there is an opportunity available to them. And so what we should take that as is that that's an opportunity for every single one of us on this call today to do something a little bit different. Let's see what we got here. Uh, Appreciation events outside of DSP week. Yeah, I think that that is important, Shannon, to talk about because I think that we do some really cool things 1 week a year. However, it really needs to go outside of that. So they do Lucky Leprechaun notes. Let's see here. Mentorship role. Yeah, that's awesome. We'd love to hear more about that. Tuition reimbursement. Um, Yeah, I think, Chris, people are asking you to share a little bit more about what that mentorship role looks about like. So if you would be comfortable sharing that, maybe Megan could watch for that. Yeah, staff highlights on our social medias. That's important to some people. Um, yeah, very, very cool. There's a lot of really cool things. Potlucks, those are always fun. I love a good potluck. Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that are low cost and easy to do. Um, Psychological safety and recognition. And so feedback gap. And so the feedback gap between wanting a safe feedback channel and having one, it's a 22-point gap. And so 81% of people want one. However, only 59% of people reported that they have one. And so when our sort of staff can't raise concerns safely, they raise them by leaving. And so think about yourself. And so what is it that you value as an employee? Do you want to be able to give feedback on things that are valuable and meaningful to you? Well, our DSPs are the same way. And so do you have a predictable feedback loop on your team? Not just an open door sort of policy, a regular structured process. And what does that look like? 54% of people said that they were comfortable giving feedback. That, folks, that's a little more than half. And so there's not a lot there. So there's practical moves that really sort of cost nothing, right? You can do a 5-minute pulse check at the start of team meetings. You can have index cards before a supervisor session where you ask people sort of what's happening. You can have a like a recognition, that recognition panel. So what does recognition look like to DSPs? And so here's what I want you to notice. Professional development opportunities were 66%. Those only 66% of our folks had those opportunities. 65% had those sort of new leadership or career pathways, although 80 some percent of people found that valuable and meaningful. And so you can see we have some room to grow here. And so the takeaway that I really want you to have for this is that specific, timely recognition is the most important thing to individuals, not in a newsletter, not in a shout out, not this employee of the month plaque, right? One-on-one telling them specifically that they mattered. And so, when is the last time that you were able to give specific private recognition to each person on your team? Or do you tend to favor one person that makes it really easy to give them feedback? And so, what percentage of people are you actually giving that recognition to, knowing that it's really important to almost the majority of our workforce? Let's see here. Yeah, I agree. And it's important that they should be able to give feedback without fear of retaliation, for sure. And I think a lot of times people feel like they can't do that. And so oftentimes they say nothing. I give feedback as I see them. Yep. Which I think are, going back to the different hats that we wear that we talked about. Oftentimes it's hard for us to consistently see people that are in the homes because we have so many different things that are pulling us in different directions. So we're going to talk about two different types of leadership. And so we're going to talk about the authentic leadership model, and then we're going to talk about the servant leadership model. And then we're going to talk about how we can sort of marry those two things together. So the authentic leadership model comes from research by uh, three guys. I'm going to butcher their names, so I'm not even going to attempt to do it. And so it's not just a framework. It is a model that has been tested across different sort of industries. And so there's four different components to it. And so the first component is this idea of self-awareness. And so this is the foundation that you can't lead authentically if you don't know what you value, right? And so it's this idea that you're self-aware. You know what you value, you know what triggers you, you know how you come across to people. And so it's this idea of asking yourself, do you know your top three leadership values? Do your team members know what those are? Right? Because we're all sort of needing to work together. And so that's this idea that you have this awareness of who you are as a leader. Next is the next sort of component is this internalized moral perspective. And so the idea behind this is that you're doing the right thing even when it's inconvenient. And so even when nobody is watching. And so in direct support environments, there's often so much that's happening behind closed doors that it becomes really, really important to do and have this sort of moral perspective. And so the idea behind this is that it's a self sort of process that uses our internal moral standards to guide our behaviors. And so it's doing right even when nobody is watching. The fourth component of the authentic leadership model is this idea of balanced processing. And so I think this is the hardest one for a lot of leaders because it means genuinely seeking out perspectives that you may disagree with before you make a decision. Not to be too polite, but to be accurate. And so I was just talking to one of my coworkers this morning because I think that what I try to always live by is that there's a lot of different ways to get to nine, right? If the end result is the answer is nine, and it doesn't matter how we get there, then we have to be willing to accept that 5 plus 7 equals 9. Five plus or 2 plus 7, and 5 plus 4, and 3 plus 3 plus 3, right? And so even if it's uncomfortable, it doesn't have to be my way for it to be the right way. And then the fourth component of the authentic leadership model is this idea of relational transparency. And so no performance is the same, right? And so the same person is your performance should be the same. And so you should be your true self across all environments. And so the idea behind this is then people know what person is showing up. And so people want somebody that is open, that is honest, that is their true self, regardless of what it is that's happening. And so this idea of consistency across settings. And so it doesn't mean that you have to show up and be the best, happiest, shiniest version of yourself every single day. It means that if you show up being who you are every single day, then people sort of learn what it is. And so over the course of time, these are not personality traits, right? Self-awareness is not a personality trait. This idea of being your authentic self isn't a personality trait, they're skills. And so what that means is that every single one of these things has an opportunity to be developed. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take these and sort of develop them over the course of time. Yeah, consistency is so important. And that's what that relational transparency really comes down to. Yeah, absolutely. Our staff absolutely have a voice. So then the servant leadership model. And so this is a companion to authentic leadership. And so if authentic leadership asks, who are you? Then the servant leadership is asking, who are you for, right? And so we're going to walk through these different colored groupings. And so that first grouping is the relational grouping. And so empathy means understanding before advising, before you give feedback, before you redirect, before you solve. Do you actually know what's driving the behavior? So in our environments, people are often carrying more than we can see, right? We employ really gritty, resilient people that have been through a lot. Our staff also have a trauma history oftentimes. And so the other part of the relational is healing. And so healing can be a unusual word in sort of a leadership context. However, it really was used intentional in the servant leadership model. The DSPs that we work for often experience compassion fatigue. They experience moral distress. They experiencing burnout. And so a leader acknowledges that. The servant leader sort of acknowledges that first and creates space for people to process those difficult sort of moments. They retain people that are able to understand and display that sort of empathy and healing. The next thing is self. And so self encompasses listening and awareness. And so listening means hearing what's said, but also hearing what's not said. And so people being aware of people's body language. And so a team member who doesn't speak up, who may be used to, or the one person that maybe has a lot to say but doesn't say it, can also serve a lot. And so you have to be aware. So awareness is self and situational self. And so being aware of what your blind spots are. So how do you come across under pressure? How is it that you know what's actually happening in your program, not just what's reported to you? So being aware of all of that, being aware of what's said, being aware of if you're only hearing from one staff all the time, what is everybody else sort of saying? And then the last part of this is community. And so that encompasses stewardship, commitment to growth, and community. So stewardship means that you're holding your role in trust. And so you're holding that for the people you supervise and for the people you support. And so you don't think of yourself necessarily as the end point. You're a link in the chain. And so you're a link in the chain of care. You are not the whole chain. You are one link of that. Commitment to growth is the most tangible. And so it's visible career ladders, it's paid development, it's internal promotions that are fair and transparent. And then that idea of community means that you're creating a team of people that want to belong, not just fill your schedule, fill your sort of need. So authentic leadership is inside out. It starts with who you are. Servant leadership is outside in. So it starts with who you're showing up for. But together they show up, or together they sort of answer both questions. And so on the bottom there, it says the servant leader asks, what do my people need to succeed, and how do I remove whatever is in their way? And so one of my theories in leadership is that I don't get to decide as a leader what's important to the people that I'm leading, right? They get to decide that. And it's my job to figure out how I can help get those things for them. So let's discuss a little bit of a comparison between the two. And so we're going to look at the authentic leadership. I lead from who I really am. And then the servantship is I lead by helping others succeed. And so it's this idea that there's two different questions. However, they really do share one sort of purpose. So that authentic leadership, just to recap, is that self-awareness. So it's knowing you, your values, what you're bringing to the table. And so your values and your behavior are in alignment. So you're not just saying one thing and doing something different. So it's not do as I say, not as I do. It's your values and your behavior are in alignment. And that there's consistency across people and across shift, right? And so you're authentic. You're authentic with every single person that you sort of lead. And then you own your mistakes and you want to reset for those quickly. Most people that you work with, if you all show up as your authentic self every single day, are usually pretty forgiving of your shortcomings. And so I saw on the roster that I have a few coworkers on here with me today. And so they're very forgiving of the fact that I make mistakes several times a day. However, 90% of the time I show up and I show up as my authentic self. They don't expect me to be perfect, but they do expect me to be consistent. And so you build that trust by having that integrity. And so authentic means who you are. And so sometimes you're not the best version of yourself, but it's being transparent and owning that. That servant leadership is leading by helping others succeed. And so you're removing those barriers so people can do great work. And so you're oftentimes believing in the power of relationships and you're standing right next to people and that you're coaching people. You're not just there to sort of monitor compliance, right? You're there to sort of improve quality. So you ask the question, and maybe not just outright, and maybe sometimes outright, what is it that you need to succeed today? What does a good day look like? And what do your folks need to be successful? You really want to invest in people's development and their growth. And then you want to advocate as much as you can. I'm not saying, go in guns a-blazing, but you want to advocate for resources and reasonable sort of expectations for people. So authentic is who you are. Servant is how you show up for others. And so oftentimes when your authentic self shows up as a servant leader, you have sort of this winning recipe. right? So if we take both of these things, yeah, owning mistakes makes you so much more personable and self-aware. We make mistakes all day, every day, and we're human, right? Our staff don't expect us to be perfect. We would fall short 100% of the time. In fact, most of the time, we're doing a very imperfect job, right? The very nature of the policies and procedures doesn't allow us to even be perfect. And we have to, we're going to talk a little bit about some of our values, but one of my values is being graceful with people. And being graceful with people means I'm going to accept less than perfect. So we are going to sort of transition away from that and talk about where the breakdown is. And so we'll go through this quickly and then we're going to take a little bit of a break. And so my red lines are a little thick there. This was meant to sort of be tongue in cheek, right? Like we talked about it. All you got to do is validate people, use your best listening skills, praise and recognize people, and give people a raise. It's easy, right? However, the real barrier comes in because there's this high pressure idea. We talked about this a couple of times already. You're a coach, you're a counselor, you're a caretaker, you're a scheduler, oftentimes doing laundry, running doctor's appointments all at the same time. And so it's high pressure that puts us in this sort of reactive mode, right? When we're in the reactive mode, we don't have coaching time. However, if we don't have coaching time, go back to our data. That's important to the people that we're leading, right? And so no coaching time means that our DSPs feel unsupported. Unsupported DSPs means that we have turnover, right? And so all of this becomes a very, very, very vicious cycle. And so it's the reality though. It's actually what happened. High pressure forces us into that reactive mode. It means there's no time for coaching. People feel unsupported, and then the pressure really gets high, right? And so sometimes we as the leader feel burned out and when they quit, and whether that's maybe we physically quit or we have just quit showing up emotionally as an authentic servant leader for people, we are sort of that load bearing infrastructure. And so oftentimes there's a breakdown. And so we're not going to talk about being nicer. What we really want to talk about for the rest of our time today is really breaking that cycle. And we want to talk about breaking that cycle with really specific, repeatable behaviors that we can sort of process even when we're stretched too thin. And so if we can have just like a moment of honesty with each other, how many people feel like or can relate to being stuck in that reactive trap, right? How does that feel when the days just don't lead or have time for that authentic sort of leadership? So I have that it is, let's see, 10:25 right now. We will take about, yeah, it does. It absolutely feels exhausting. So we will come back in about 15, 10. We'll say 10 minutes and then be 15 minutes. So let's see, 10:40, and then we'll finish up.
Perfect.
So we are on break. We'll give people just a couple of minutes to come back and then we'll go ahead and get started. I don't know.
I've not seen any questions come up in the chat box at this point, but definitely a lot of good examples and conversation are being shared.
Okay, great. Can you see me? Oh, no.
No, but I can hear you.
Okay, well, that's,
Half the battle, right?
I don't know if people would say that's the most important thing or not, honestly.
I just wanted to highlight, Chris had mentioned earlier the DSP mentorship. We asked for more him to be willing to share more about that. And they said that they're looking at staff retention in that role. And the mentor will be supporting current and incoming DSPs with trainings, onboarding, and completing the OJTs in a timely manner. So it looks like maybe someone's kind of paired with the newer staff and kind of walk through that whole process with them.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, it really is. It's a neat model. Um, and again, I'm still not seeing any questions that just popped up. So, yeah, but again, just please do feel free to drop any questions in the chat box or in the Q&A box. Cynthia wants to know how your vacation to Florida was, Amy.
You know what, Cynthia, thank you for asking. We had a great time, actually. I don't know if anybody is familiar with Ulta Beauty World, but my sister-in-law actually had a ticket to it, and so it was kind of fun to experience that. But yeah. And then my daughter does competitive cheer, which is like a whole nother world for any of you cheer moms out there. So we did that. And so it was a big, giant trip to Florida for, yeah, it was a good time.
I was definitely jealous of you.
And the weather was
Um,
perfect,
yeah.
like absolutely perfect. I'm still monkeying around with my camera. So yeah, we were at World Rose. Good job. Yep, Jackie, that ticket was no joke. I also tried to get a ticket, and it was really a sight to be seen. Really a sight to be seen.
Plus, you were in Florida.
I know that's the best. Somebody asked what our favorite
I was
flavor
just gonna say,
of ice cream was, and he is speaking my language. Oh, here we go.
we're getting
Is
the
this?
important questions today.
I know. She cheers for Wicked Elite. I'm in the very northern part of Illinois. And so, like, you can look at Wisconsin from where I live. So she is at Wicked. It's not a big gym by any means. So my go-to, um, like favorite ice cream is mint chip. And I like it when the chip is like thin, like Baskin Robbins mint chip, because they have those really thin, like chocolate chips.
Mhm.
But I also would not turn my nose up at a good vanilla and then add my own toppings to it.
You sound like my husband.
I mean, your husband and I have a lot in common.
Yeah.
I know him well, so
I would have to go with you as well
that's
for the
right.
mint chip. That's one of my favorites. And like Moose Tracks kind of does one where they have like
Oh,
the mint cups in it, and they are like it's a good balance of mint and chocolate. But I
absolutely.
also like one of my favorites in Baskin Robbins is like their peanut butter chocolate where it has like this ribbon
Yes.
of peanut butter in it, and it's very good.
Yeah, Haagen-Dazs has a really good chocolate peanut butter as well.
Mm.
Um, so yeah.
One of
Yeah,
my
I
absolute
mean,
favorite was a Ben and Jerry's flavor that's retired, and I'm still heartbroken about it.
yeah, I mean, clearly, um, there's no shortage of conversations.
People are speaking our love language here, talking about ice cream.
Yeah, on a perfectly good Tuesday at what, not even 11
Yeah.
o'clock.
One person did, I just want to bring this up, an example that they gave, to switch back a little bit here. We have DSPs as
Way to
job.
get us back on track,
I
Megan.
know, sorry. I mean, we can keep talking about ice cream, but I thought this was a good idea here. Someone said, excuse me, we have DSPs as job coach who helps new DSPs with OJT. I thought that was another really good idea.
That's an awesome idea. An awesome idea. Yeah, I think. The sort of realist in me also thinks like you got to be really sure you trust that DSP, right? Because how many people, sometimes I go into new hire training or am working with new employees and they've heard the horror stories about that person, right? And so you really want to make sure that you're pairing people with sort of DSPs that are aligned with their values as well, because that toxic sort of traits can spread as well. Okay. So the first thing I want to talk about is one of our core sort of skill building tools. And so this is a nice sort of framework that's a really practical tool. You can make this into a simple little card that you can carry with you. And so CARE is really a framework for accountability conversations that preserve both the standard and the relationship. And so it allows us to not have to like hold a line and damage relationships. However, it allows us to really do both. You can hold the line and then maintain a relationship if you sort of stick to a structure for conversations that really allows you to give feedback and sort of set things in the right place. Going back to that first, what was it called? Oh, a quote that we had from Brene Brown. The other thing that she talks a lot about, if you've ever done any sort of research on her leadership styles, is she always says, like, clarity is kindness. And so it is so much easier, whether you like it, lump it, or love it, right? To know what the expectation is. And so you don't have to agree with it, but understanding what it is, the why, and being clear, even if, I mean, I'd rather somebody just give me feedback, even if I'm doing something wrong, instead of just allowing me to continue to cause frustration for people. So, whoa, goodness gracious. So the idea of the CARE framework is it's an acronym. And so C starts with connect. And so before you address the behavior, you want to make contact with the person. You want to name what it is that you're seeing and validate the impact, not to excuse it, but to signal that you see them as a person, not a problem. And so you could say, I noticed that you've been quieter lately and seem stretched too thin. I want to make sure that I understand what's going on for you, right? And so that's it. That's a connection. You can label what it is that you're seeing. It doesn't have to be, long and drawn out or anything of the sort. So you're going to connect with the person before you address the behavior. And so go back to some of the data that we saw about what is important to the DSPs that we're working with. What's important to them is that feedback and that connection, right? 81% of our employees said that they wanted to have be recognized. And so you connect with the person. Then you want to ask. And so there is nothing worse. And I'm sure everybody on here has experienced some sort of supervisor just sort of assuming. right? Without asking their version of the story. And so you want to ask. So you're going to connect with the person and then you're going to ask before you assume. So you want to know what is driving the behavior. And you're not going to know that until you ask because that's their reality. That's their version of it. And so what's been getting in the way? This is where you discover whether it's really a skill deficit, a will, or a circumstance. And so that is going to allow us to determine the whole response. Because if we assume that it's willful, but they don't understand the process, then we can teach and train that up, right? If it is willful and negligent, then that's a whole different set of circumstances and interventions that we need to throw at the problem. And so sometimes it maybe wasn't the right outcome, but it was the best that they could do with the circumstances that were presented in front of them, right? We talked about staffing. And so maybe they were short staffed and they did the best they could in the situation that was being presented to them. And so what's been getting in the way? What would be the most helpful from me right now? So you're going to connect with the person and then you're going to ask them what was driving the behavior. Then we're going to R. And so that stands for reset. And so now we're going to set or reset the expectation. And so we're going to clearly state the why, not what the policy says or, Megan said you have to, but the why. Why does it matter to the person? Why does it matter to our agency? Why does it matter to the people that we're supporting together? And so that's where that idea of authentic leadership shows up, right? You want to make it resort back to the person. So we've connected with the person, we've understand their version of the why, right? Whether it's a skill, a will, or a circumstance. Then we've reset. So we've reset the expectation for them. And then we're going to equip them. And so we want to equip them, meaning we sort of close the loop with an action. And so what support can we provide? What can we do different? Do we need to check in on the situation? That's where that servant leadership shows up because we're walking alongside of them, right? That's where servant leadership lives in this E. And so we're not just correcting, we're really investing in a solution. And so we're going to go into these sorts of things a little bit more, but I wanted to throw this care framework out there first because I think it's a nice way and it's a practical way to sort of guide interactions with our staff as we move forward. So you want to connect, you want to ask them, you want to reset, and then you want to equip. And I think for me, the one thing that stands out in this, where I really have to challenge my thinking, is the A. And so that asking piece, it's important that you don't go into situations where you're working with direct support professionals with an assumption about why they did what they did, right? And so I think it's important that we really sort of go into it with an open mind and a perspective about their version of why and sort of hear their version of it before we decide what it is that we're going to do. There are times where policies and procedures sort of dictate what the outcome of a certain act has to be, right? However, it can also lead us to ensuring that things like that don't happen again if it was willful, right? Like what was it that we sort of missed? If there was nothing else that could have changed the outcome of it based on their version of reality, then it's important. And it's also important to sort of a lot of times we ask our staff to document things that happen. However, there are times where the documentation does not clearly define what actually happened. And so really sitting down with them and debriefing on incidents that occur and asking them, is this sort of the best you could do in these situations? Or is there a world in which you wish the outcome would have been different? So myself with a little bit. The other sort of practical tool is this idea of reflecting. And so it really talks about your values. And so a lot of things that we've talked about today in authentic leadership is really being value driven. And so if you were to write your sort of top 3 values in your own words, not integrity because it sounds right. What are the words that you would actually use? Is it following through? Is it being honest even when it's uncomfortable? Is it making people feel seen? And so, sort of, if you know what those are, what are they? Share them in the chat. If you're not comfortable sharing, that's fine too. I feel like values are becoming more and more important to people as we lead people. This new generation of people is very value driven. They're very just. They want to work for mission driven organizations, value driven organizations. They want to understand the why. And so most leaders have very strong values. And so the work isn't really finding better values, it's closing the gap between what we say, what we believe, and what we actually do during pressure or under pressure in crisis, right? It's sort of going back to that idea of authentic leadership where you're moral and just even when nobody is watching. So, what are your values? And so then audit your last 2 weeks. For each value, think over the last 2 weeks. Find a specific situation where your behavior clearly reflected that value. And then think about times where it didn't. Where was the pressure? Where was the moment that pulled us away from that? And are there things that we could do differently? And when you do this sort of exercise, audit yourself every couple of weeks and think about that. Again, go back to that idea that these are skills. These are skills that we can teach ourselves with practice. And so every couple of weeks, audit your values. Where are situations where you were aligned when you were supporting people? And then where are situations in which you were conflicted and not able to be, that things didn't align with your values? There are times and there are moments where we all do things where maybe they don't align with our values because that's what the company policy says or does, right? And then you have to sort of decide where that lies for you. And so I want you to be fair when you're doing this. And so be specific. And so not think about it in the sense that you were, pretty fair to people in the moment, but name the moment. What did it look like? And then I want you to commit to something. And so pick a behavior that you're not necessarily, I'm going to try to be more present, right? Because you can't really tangibly articulate that. But what I want you to do is commit to doing something like a 5-minute one-to-one check-in before that one staff leaves on Tuesdays, right? I challenge you guys to think about like, are you fair and just across all of the people that you're working with? And so really sort of commit to something and name an actual behavior, not a mindset shift, right? So not, like I said, not being more present, name something specific that you're going to be able to commit to. And so, like I said, a 5-minute check-in, being present on the homes that you're supervising, 2 afternoons a week for an hour so you can sort of connect with the staff. So, I want you to name something that's a behavior. So name the person, name the date, name the action in which you're actually going to do it. And so the other thing I want you to do is really think about the fact that the gap between your values and your behavior is not a character flaw. It's information. And so use it. And so in order to use it though, you have to collect the data. And so, like I said, I really challenge you to take this and think about every couple of weeks, put it in your calendar, take 10 minutes to think about times where your actions aligned with your values and times where you conflicted and things that as a result, you could sort of do things differently. I think when you think about your values, think about a leader who disappointed you. If you've ever worked for somebody where you have left interactions with them feeling disappointed, what was it that they did or failed to do that bothered you the most? And so there's usually something, I mean, for those of us that have been in the field for as long as some of us have, there's that one thing that still sort of stings, right? And so that's usually sort of the inverse of one of our core values. If they were inconsistent, then we probably value reliability. If they threw us under the bus, then we probably value loyalty or fairness. So think about what it is about a leader that disappointed you when you think about your values, and why does that disappointment still sort of linger after all of this time? And then think about a time where you felt proud of yourself as a leader. What are those? When things went well, when you showed up the way that you wanted to, when you left an interaction with somebody feeling like you were the best version of yourself. What were you doing? Those sorts of behaviors point to a value. And then think about a time where you were most likely to compromise under pressure. And so the value that you sacrifice first when your shift sort of goes sideways, that's one worth naming, because that's often in a gap that can do the most sort of damage. And so for me, I value fairness. I value presence. The power of relationships is very important to me. I value my coworkers. I value in everything that they sort of bring, all of their little nuggets of joy and humor and collaboration. And so I value presence, because to me, all of those things are sort of tied up into one little thing. If I can be present with people, then I can get all of those nuggets from people. And then I value transparency. And so I value knowing the why. I do better when I have information, whether I like it or not. Because if I don't have the information, I tend to make it up, and do a really good job at making up things that are the furthest version from the truth, usually, right? Sort of worst case scenario. If there's a worst case scenario, I have it. And so I do well with fairness and presence and open, transparent communication. I don't know, did people share some of those? Oh, wow. I opened this to Pamela saying one boss years ago told me I was replaceable. Yeah, that probably stung, right? Accountability, that's a important one. Empathy, honesty, resourcefulness. Honesty is a big one. Respect, fairness, empathy. These are all great. Grace, yeah. Transparency, I agree. I talked about that. Transparency. Yeah, the why, right? It's easier if we understand the why, whether we like it or not. Yeah, Rachel, that's a great example that you gave. So Rachel shared that she had a supervisor a long time ago deny her PTO for her own PT, for her supervisor's PTO, when she knew that Rachel had something important to do. Now she makes sure that her team has first say for their PTO, so it's fair. That's way to take something and turn it around, because you realize it probably was a gut punch, right? And still continues to be. And so you took that and sort of made it something that was important to you that you did for everybody else. Yeah, I think when you look at people, if you can really pinpoint what it was about a supervisor that maybe, go back to that 50 to 70% of people that have left a job over a supervisor, what was it that supervisor did? And they probably caused us to sort of pivot accordingly, right? So the other thing we want to do is take those four things that we talked about earlier, those columns, right? The hope, the trust, the compassion, and the stability. Those were things that DSP said that they needed from us as leaders. So how can we make those concrete? Which one does each one of those look like for our daily sort of behavior? So if we start with hope, it's not just cheerleading, it's connecting. It's helping our staff see that every single day has a real effect on on their life. And so when that connection breaks, what moves in? Burnout moves in, right? And so what we want to do is sort of walk through. And so you can start every team meeting. And so it's a quick sort of 2-minute investment. And so you can make any team meeting. You can name a person, you can name what's changed, you can sort of talk about a story of impact that gives people a connection to the overall mission, right? It encourages people to keep putting their feet on the ground every single day. And so it can be done quickly. And all of you think about a story of impact, whether it was an individual being able to make it through a day program, if it was them being able to earn a reinforcer, if it was whatever that is, there is no shortage of stories of impact. And encourage your team to go around and share stories of impact, something that was meaningful to them, but it really sort of roots us in hope when we understand that. And so the other thing that you can do that sort of roots us in hope is announcing any sort of change. You can always lead with the why before the what. And so a good majority of us said that that transparency was super important to us, that that was one of our values. And so that sort of is the why before the what. We cannot agree with it, but if we can understand where it's coming from, it sure makes it a lot easier to digest, right? And so when we announce changes without that sort of context, our staff, just like myself and probably some of you, fill it in with the worst sort of assumption. And so they are no different than us, that if we don't explain that, they are often left feeling if it was something they did, and sometimes there's nothing we can do about it, right? It's a policy change. We didn't have any say in it, but if we can find the sort of why, it makes it easier. The other thing we can do is post visible sort of progress boards, milestones reached, goals met, people moving forward. And so it doesn't have to be a fancy system. It can be a whiteboard, it can be a list, whatever sort of works. For me, one thing that I always like to recommend is that when we have the pleasure of being in all of your agencies, you typically have some sort of communication book or board. And so what I encourage people to do is start with what went well on their shift. And so it's really easy for people to take that communication book and a laundry list of everything that went wrong. But encourage your staff to leave their shift with something that went right. And so change the form you have them fill out to celebrate those sort of wins out loud. And so, somebody made their first community outing that happened because of their team, and it's really sort of shift your mindset. So if you want your DSPs to bring creativity and care, sort of name it when you see it, and then end every session with what's one thing you're proud of from this week. And so every interaction you have people tell you what's going well, and so really sort of shift your thinking. So what that sounds like is here's why this change matters for the people we support, not just for compliance, but why it matters. I want to tell you something, that happened to Jamie this work, and it's because of the work you put in. Really name those behaviors. And so our goal with Hope is that we want to connect the work to something bigger, every single shift, every single interaction. What we don't want to do, or what we want to avoid, if we can, there will be situations where it's out of our control. However, if we can show up 85 to 90% of the time, our staff are pretty graceful with us when we're unable to. And so we want to avoid announcing big changes with no explanation. We want to avoid only talking about problems in meetings. We want to shift our thinking to being more proactive. And then we want to make the work feel like it's manageable, right? And then we never want to connect daily tasks to real sort of outcomes. And so our reflection for this is, when did you last tell your team a story about someone they support and what changed for them? Okay. Let's check the comments here. Yeah, I mean, you're talking about compassion and walking out. Yeah, this is great. I encourage you guys to stay up with the chat. People are sharing some really powerful stories there. So the next sort of column that we talked about was trust. And so trust is really built in small moments. It's that authentic servant leadership. And so it isn't built in the big moments, it's built in the small one. And it can be destroyed in small ones too, right? And so a staff member that watches you apply different standards to different people, there is nothing worse. Think about you if you've ever had a supervisor that treats you different than your colleagues. It doesn't feel good. People are observant. And so the other thing, so our daily behaviors for this are applying the safe standards to everybody. Don't have visible favorites. It can be easy, right? We all have those staff where if they're working, it makes our job so much easier. You know you're going to have a good night if you're on call, if Megan is working because she's your A plus go-to girl, right? However, you never want your other people to feel that way. You want to give corrective feedback within 48 hours. Never save it for a formal review. People's reviews should not be these wake up calls that they've not been doing their job correctly. It should be a time to sort of discuss all of the feedback they've been getting for the past year. So clarity is kindness. So give that feedback as soon as possible using that care sort of model. When you say you're going to follow up on something, close the loop and do it. Have that say do mentality, building that trust with people and admitting when you were wrong. I made a call that wasn't fair, and here's what I plan to do differently. Ultimately, people will forgive you, right? And people do not expect you to be perfect human beings. And then, whenever possible, deliver hard news yourself. There are times I said that one of my goals was to always be fair and just and let people tell me what was important to them. However, just because it's important to them doesn't mean that I'm going to be able to do it. And so, whenever possible, I want to make sure that I deliver that hard news myself. And so, the other thing I don't want to do is make sure that I'm not delivering news in sort of that telephone game where I'm giving the world the news to Megan and then Megan quickly runs and tells Tiffany. And so, the quicker I can get the news to everybody, the better off it's going to be. What we want to avoid in this situation is we want to avoid treating people differently based on who we like, saving feedback for annual reviews, or pretending that you have no information when you actually do. And so it's better to say like, yep, I am aware of what's happening. However, I'm not in a situation where I can really share that with you right now. Right. And so being as honest and transparent as possible. And sometimes being as transparent as possible means that we're not able to share with the information that we know. We deal with some pretty highly sensitive, confidential information at times. And so it's okay to say that. They don't have to like that answer, but it's best to give the answer that's honest and transparent. And then the other thing is letting others deliver hard messages for you. Even we can do hard things, people, and that means delivering hard news as well. The other bucket column, the next one was compassion. And I see you guys are talking about some things with compassion already. And so compassion and leadership is really not the same as leniency. And I think oftentimes we get the two confused and think that we don't have to hold the line because we're just being soft with people. It means that we see the person before we address the behavior. And so in this work, it can be emotionally demanding, right? And so our support can often be low. And so a leader who recognizes that people are struggling often has retention advantages. And so with compassion, what we want to do is see the person behind the role. And so that's not softness. And so we just simply want to ask, how are you doing? And wait for the real answer, right? Or pick up on those nonverbal cues. Notice when somebody's energy has shifted and name it privately. You seem really off today. Do you want to talk? Before giving feedback, ask what's going on for you right now. And so performance issues often have context to them, especially lingering performance issues. They have context. So never address performance concerns in front of peers. You always want to do them privately and you always want to stay calm. So, and the other thing you want to do is check in after hard shifts, not to necessarily evaluate, but to simply acknowledge what that person carried for that shift. We deal with some really hard things, right? We have individuals that display really super challenging behaviors that are really medically complex. We deal with really unfortunate trauma histories. And so it's okay to acknowledge that. And it's okay to acknowledge what our staff are carrying with them. So the things we want to avoid, addressing performance in team meetings, right? You don't be passive aggressive and address something that's specific to one person in a room full of people just because it's easier that way. You don't want to assume that you know what's driving the behavior. So go back to that care model. This is the A. This is where you're asking what it is that's driving that behavior. Is it a will deficit? Is it a skill deficit? Or is it sort of that capacity bandwidth? And then you don't want to skip the check-in. You want to connect with the person first. So that care model, you want to connect before you ask and try to fix it. And so you don't want to jump connecting with somebody. Then the other thing we want to do is treat all staff the same regardless of the context. So which person on the team, on your team, do you know the least about as a person? And what's one thing that you could commit to asking them this week to get to know them better? We just all had a very lengthy conversation about ice cream flavors and rather enjoyed ourselves. So think of something silly like that. Do you know your staff's favorite ice cream or your color? Those sorts of things. Like get to know them as human beings. Then the last column is stability. So in a field that really is defined by unpredictability, we have behavioral crises, we have regular call-ins, we have surveys and policy changes and procedures, right? The leader who creates these pockets of predictability really becomes invaluable. And so stability isn't about eliminating chaos because we're never, ever, ever going to do that, but it's about not adding to it, right? And so what we want to do is we want to communicate changes at least 48 hours in advance whenever possible. Now, that is not always possible, is it? But when possible, we want to be as transparent as possible. When you don't have answers, you want to say so. I don't know yet, but I'll tell you by whatever date that is. And if you don't know by whatever date that is, follow back up again. You want to hold the same supervision sort of cadence every single week. And so you don't want to show up just when things are going bad. That leads itself to, oh, here comes Amy. The room must be on fire, right? Our staff sort of pick up on that. You want to create a written what happens when guide so nobody is guessing during a crisis. And so this sort of goes with the idea that you can't plan for the crisis, but when we know better, we have to do better. And so don't allow the same things to happen over and over and over again. You want to create that stability for people. The other thing you want to do is as a leader, you want to communicate calm. And so you got to regulate your body language under pressure. And so think about coworkers or leaders that you've had where you can tell what's happening the second they walk into the room without them even saying anything. And so you want to talk at a slower pace. You want to lower your voice. You don't want to sigh in front of your team or show that sort of level of disgust that maybe you're thinking in your head. So our avoidances for this are that we want to avoid those last minute schedule changes. You don't want to visibly panic or vent or stress in front of your team when you can. You don't want to have inconsistent supervision. So if you cancel every single time things get busy, you will never have those meetings. And so the other thing you don't want to do is let rumors fill in information. And so be as transparent as possible. So what is one source of chaos in your program right now that's within your control to reduce. So really think about that. So these sort of 7 daily behaviors came directly from the DSP survey that we talked about. And so we want to talk about these behaviors, how we show up, right? So give specific private recognition weekly. So these 7 things are sort of plucked from those 4 columns, which come from that survey. You want to hold predictable check-ins. So you want to remove surprises. You want to create that stability that everybody craves. Our DSPs crave it. We crave it, right? Think about your supervisor. Nobody likes it when they just show up and want to meet. So practice respect and transparency in every hard conversation. And then coach like you're a mentor, not just a compliance monitor. So teach and train. And then how we design the system. You want to build safe feedback routines, close the loop. If you say it, we did it. If you say it, we did it. So have a say do mentality. And then invest in those visible learning paths and internal advancement opportunities. And then reduce chaos. Have clear expectations, have clear staffing plans, and then onboard support up front. So the caveat to this is that people on here are thinking you don't have time for this. What I want to challenge you for is that if you make time for this, you're going to have less turnover, right? Research shows this is what people value. This is what they want in their organization and in their leader. And 70% of people are staying at a job because of their frontline leader. So if you walk one step ahead of all of this, then we can sort of get out of that. And so if we build a culture of leadership from an organizational standpoint, we offer a wide range of career experiences, offer those early on in our career. And so are there mentorships? Are there activities or certain things that people are good at? Find what people are good at and really pour into that. Give structured opportunity to take on new challenges. Give people a bulletin board if you have a creative person. Allow people to plan a spirit week, whatever it is that sort of speaks to them. Build departmental networks and allow people to be in constant communication with every department in your organization. And so create visible career ladders for people so they understand what they need to do to get to the next step if that's important to them. And then challenge all levels within leadership. And then you want to promote differing perspectives. And so diversity challenges our thinking. And so go back to that example of if the answer is 9, it doesn't matter how we got there, right? And so really challenge your thinking that it's okay if they got there by doing 3 plus 3 plus 3. And we need to accept that. We want to stay grounded, be steady and confident in all conditions. And so that's your authentic leadership. That's how you're showing up. You're showing up consistent in every situation. You can't be on one day and then absent for 3 months and then you decide to get back at it, right? That consistency and then continuously and consciously sort of balance your motivation. And so what motivates people both internally and sort of externally? And then being the same person across all environments and all staff. And so oftentimes with our case management level positions, they're more in tune with your AM staff, your first shift staff, right? And so, but be the same person that shows up across all 3 shifts. And so people know what to expect. And empower people to lead. You want to create structured opportunities for people to learn and for people to lead. We offer a lot of trainings at ICPN. And when we offer trainings to direct support professionals, they love to learn, they love to come, they're full of ideas. And so create opportunities, even if they're little micro training opportunities for your staff at your meetings that you can do that can give them little bite-sized nuggets of information. And so listen to ideas from every level. Your direct support professionals are doing hard work every single day, and they often have really great ideas. The other thing is that we really want to let people be themselves fully at work within reason, right? But really allow people to sort of make work their own, make the shift their own, bring their ideas. It's more fulfilling for them. They're going to stay longer. They're going to feel valued. And when people feel valued, their work becomes valued. And when people are doing sort of value-driven work, you sort of have a value-driven culture. So building that team culture, you want to have follow through. You want to name and celebrate your values in action. You want to have transparent communication about decisions. If there's a decision in which people can be a part of, allow them to be a part of it. Check in with people. Don't just check up on their work and make sure they're doing it. Check in. They're humans taking care of humans. And create a space for staff to really surface concerns early. If you allow people to sort of communicate feedback to you on a consistent basis, you're going to start getting that earlier and earlier in that chain. And it will be less and less and less adversive over the course of time. Things that kill your culture are saying one thing and doing another, or applying those standards unevenly across the team. Avoid having hard conversations until they become a crisis because it's easier to not say anything. Give credit to your team. If you show up as an authentic servant leader, then you guys win together and lose together. And nobody needs to take credit because it's your whole team. So give your team credit for the things that they're doing. And then the worst thing you can do to sort of kill your culture is being silent during uncertainty. Again, show up and say that you don't know. That's okay. That's better than saying nothing. So your culture becomes what you tolerate, it becomes what you celebrate, and it becomes who you are and who you show up every single day. So what I want you guys to leave today with is one action. And so I want you to start and really start today about what is one leadership behavior that you can practice different this week. Who on your team needs you to show up differently? And then which one of those four needs, hope, trust, compassion, or stability, is most absent on your team right now? And go back and think about what are some of those micro little things that you can do. Be specific on what it is that you're going to do. Are you going to give private, specific recognition to two people on your team before Friday, right? Don't say something like be more appreciative. No, what is it specifically that you're going to do? And so when you're thinking about a specific person on your team, what is it that they need from you? And what is it and why is it that they need that from you? What is it that they're not getting? And so what would you change? What would change if you gave them that thing? And so think about that. And then think about which one of those things, hope, trust, compassion, or stability, is missing. And so enlist the help of a buddy. And so what is it that you can do? And so we all chose to be in this field. None of us are getting rich doing this, but we all chose this field. And so that says something about us and how we show up every single day. And so what we want to do is make sure that we're showing up intentionally in our behavior and how people view us. And so really show up as your authentic self and show up for the people that you're working for every single day. And so you are the environment. And so when people show up, they don't experience your organization as a whole first. They often experience their supervisor. And go back to that, what we talked about in the beginning, that ripple effect. That has the DSP experience. Your DSPs are going to feel more supported. They're going to feel more sort of psychologically safe. They're going to feel valued and heard. That data says we're going to retain those people longer. And then they're going to have a future at our organization. It improves the quality of supports. And so it improves consistency and person-centered approaches, which is important to all of us. Stability of relationships. And then there's going to be confidence in people's skills, their expectations, which at the end result improves the quality of life, the dignity, the choice, and the stability for the people that we're supporting. And so the takeaway from all of this is that if we build a great place to work, great work takes place, right? And so I thank you all for spending a couple of hours with Megan and I here this morning. And so, yeah, I don't know, Megan, if you have anything in our last couple of minutes, but I am done.
I still have not seen any questions come up in the box, but again, tons of great examples that you all shared this morning. So we really appreciate that. I think that really helps enhance an already great topic, when people can share things that they're actively doing. Um, just as a final reminder, um, you will get a survey that pops up at the end of the Zoom, and that's a satisfaction survey that gives us your feedback. We always appreciate that, and we really do take a look at that. So please do share with us. And then the survey that comes to your email that you registered for this webinar with is the one that you must complete to receive your CEs. Um, Someone asked if this was recorded and going to be posted. It is. It's on our YouTube channel. You can search us at ICPN. And all of our previous webinars are up there. We normally repeat our webinars, so we pick one of the two to post. So this will be posted. Let me see. Yes, and then you can always, once they're posted on YouTube, obviously share away, if you want to share that with your staff or anybody who couldn't make it today. Um, but I think that's all I'm seeing in here. Thank you so much, Amy. That was a lot of great information shared today. I really
Yep.
appreciate that.
I hope your headache goes away, Megan. We'll talk
Eh,
soon.
I'm trying.
All
Thank
right,
you. All
bye.
right, bye.